Chapter 2. Philosophical Tools. Learning Objectives. 2.1 Learn to recognize logical inconsistencies. 2.2 Test definitions by using counterexamples and thought experiments. 2.3 Differentiate between logical and causal possibility. 2.4 Reconstruct arguments in standard form. 2.5 Evaluate inductive and deductive arguments. At its heart, philosophy consists of exploring and assessing answers to open questions. This process, especially the assessment of arguments, demands that philosophers use certain logical tools and arid techniques that may be foreign to you. For example, let's consider the following quotation from an encyclopedia entry about the problem of evil. The argument from evil focuses upon the fact that the world appears to contain states of affairs that are bad, or undesirable, or that should have been prevented by any being that could have done 50, and it asks how the existence of such states of affairs is to be squared with the existence of God. However, the argument can be formulated into very different ways. First, it can be formulated as a purely deductive argument that attempts to show that there are certain facts about the evil in the world that are logically incompatible with the existence of God. One especially ambitious form of this first sort of argument attempts to establish the very strong claim that it is logically impossible for it to be the case both that there is any evil at all and that God exists. Alternatively, rather than being formulated as a deductive argument for the very strong claim that it is logically impossible for both God and evil to exist, or for God and certain types, or instances, or a certain amount of evil to exist, the argument from evil can instead be formulated as an evidential, or inductive probabilistic, argument for the more modest claim that there are evils that actually exist in the world that make it unlikely or perhaps very unlikely that God exists. Confused? Probably. Trained philosophers can read this encyclopedia entry without any problem, but for beginning students the text can be quite challenging. If you look closely, the text contains several terms that are important to philosophy but that might not be familiar to you if you are encountering philosophy for the first time. This chapter will help you to become familiar with some important logical tools that philosophers frequently use in thinking and writing. The following chart will give you an overview of the concepts that we will discuss in this chapter. Learning to use logical tools can be a bit challenging, but your efforts to master these techniques will pay off in later chapters when we explore and evaluate responses to significant philosophical problems. Don't get discouraged if you can't understand the usefulness of these tools immediately. The role that they play will become clearer as we explore more specific philosophical questions later on. 2.1 Learn to recognize logical inconsistencies. In everyday life, we rarely step back and test whether all our beliefs about the world are compatible with each other. In philosophical investigation, on the other hand, the search for logical consistency becomes a driving force for innovation and philosophical progress. Philosophy is, as American philosopher William James, 1842–1910, pointed out, an unusually stubborn effort to think clearly. But what precisely is logical consistency, and how is it related to thinking clearly about the world? Some examples will help to illustrate this important philosophical tool. Suppose you meet somebody who holds the following two beliefs. A. It is always morally wrong to take the life of a human being. B. It is morally permissible to execute serious criminals. It is clear that there is a logical tension between these two claims. If assertion A is true and it is always wrong to take the life of a human being, then it follows that it must also be wrong to execute serious criminals. So claims A and B cannot be true at the same time, and they are, therefore, logically inconsistent with each other. In general, we can say that a set of claims is logically consistent if and only if it is possible that all claims in the set are true at the same time. A set of claims is logically inconsistent if and only if it is impossible that all claims in the set are true at the same time. Initially, you might think that holding inconsistent beliefs happens rarely and only in the minds of foolish people. Unfortunately, perhaps fortunately for philosophy, this is not the case. Even the smartest thinkers find it difficult to avoid inconsistencies. The following exercise illustrates how easy it is to harbor inconsistent beliefs in one's big picture view of the universe. As you can see from these examples, identifying logical inconsistencies may not be a trivial affair. Most inconsistencies are not easy to spot and require the discussion and analysis of additional beliefs. In order to illustrate this more clearly, consider the following example. Suppose you meet somebody who holds the following two beliefs. A. Everything that exists is a physical entity. B. Angels exist. A and B together are not yet logically inconsistent with each other. However, we can ask whether the person also holds the following background beliefs. C. Angels are non-physical entities. If it turns out that the person does hold belief C in addition to A and B, then we have shown that those beliefs are logically inconsistent with each other. This example illustrates that the search for logical consistency requires that we also investigate background beliefs. We are frequently not fully aware of what our background beliefs are and whether they are in conflict with the rest of our belief system. Philosophy helps us to unravel hidden aspects of our belief system. In this way, we can discover that our own views of the universe are much more complex than we initially imagined them to be. Food for thought. Determine whether the following sets of statements are logically consistent with each other. 1. All rich people are happy. Some homeless people are happy. 2. All philosophers are male. Simone de Beauvoir is a female philosopher. Taller than Terry. 4. The future is unknowable. God is omniscient. 3. A lake is taller than Xavier. Terry is taller than A lake. Xavier is. 5. The theory of evolution is true. God exists. 6. Shadesha is smaller than Bryce. Emily is smaller than Bryce. Emily is smaller than Shadesha. 7. It is always morally wrong to kill innocent persons. Having an abortion is morally acceptable. 8. Nobody is perfect. My father is flawless. 9. Humans are free. The past determines the future. 10. Death is the end of all perception. Death is a good thing. 11. There exists a first cause. Everything is caused. 12. No animal has a soul. Humans are animals. 13. A democracy is the best form of government. The majority of people in every society are stupid. 14. All birds can fly. Penguins cannot fly. A demand of reason. Avoid contradictions. Once we realize that some of our beliefs about the world are logically inconsistent with each other, we have found a reason to reevaluate and change our big picture view of the world. Many of us, however, are not excited about the prospect of having to modify our beliefs. We want to hold on to that which is familiar and comforting. In an extreme case, one might imagine somebody who resists change in the following way. All right, you have shown that my beliefs about the world are in conflict with one another. So what? I think that logical consistency is overrated. I am happy to have a logically inconsistent belief system. My thoughts are free, and I have the right to believe whatever I want. A specific example might help us to illustrate the problematic nature of holding logically inconsistent beliefs. Suppose you meet Maria, who believes the following. A. God loves all people. B. If God loves somebody, then God makes sure that the person will be saved. C. Some people will go to hell. D. All people who go to hell are not saved by God. This set of beliefs is logically inconsistent. Suppose Maria realizes this, but she is nevertheless unwilling to change her belief system. What is wrong with that? In this situation, we can show Maria that her beliefs A and B commit her to believing that all people will be saved by God. Moreover, her beliefs C and D commit her to believing that some people will not be saved by God. Putting these two beliefs together, we can show Maria that she has to believe the following as well: all people will be saved by God, and some people will not be saved by God. This last belief is very peculiar. Philosophers call this type of statement a contradiction, that is, a sentence that both denies and asserts that something is the case. Contradictions have a unique property in that no matter what the world is like, we can know right away that contradictions cannot be true. They are necessarily false statements and thus ought not to be part of a reasonable view of the world. It is a demand of reason that we eliminate logical inconsistencies in our big picture view of the world and that we are willing to change our beliefs if they have been shown to entail logical inconsistencies or contradictions. The good news is that there is always more than one way to make an inconsistent set of beliefs logically consistent again. In the case of Maria, there are numerous ways for her to modify her beliefs. For example, she might decide to modify her belief A and believe that God loves most but not all people. Alternatively, she might modify her belief D and believe that people who go to hell, temporarily, can nevertheless be saved in the end. As you can see from these examples, there are endless possibilities. The more creative your mind is, the more options you will see. However, selecting the right adjustment of your big picture view of the universe is often tricky. Any modification of one belief can lead to unforeseen consequences in other parts of your belief system. Thinking through these consequences is a lot of fun and a natural byproduct of doing philosophy. Food for thought. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, 469 to 399 BCE, is famous for his ability to detect logical inconsistencies among the beliefs of his contemporaries. He would start a conversation by asking, for instance, what is courage? After soliciting a definition of courage from his interlocutor, Socrates would proceed to show that this definition together with some other plausible beliefs leads to a contradiction. Socrates' dialogue partners are often puzzled and confused to discover that such inconsistencies exist in their belief system. In response, Socrates invites them to change either their background beliefs or their definition of virtue. When interlocutors do this, Socrates proceeds to find a new inconsistency. This type of questioning is sometimes referred to as the Socratic method. As you can easily imagine, the use of the Socratic method leads frequently to confusion and anger. People are frustrated when they are shown that they have inconsistent beliefs. This means that their big picture view of the universe cannot be true and needs to be modified. Have you ever seen anybody use a line of questioning that resembles the Socratic method? If yes, what were the results? Under what condition is this method especially useful? Definitions. To point to test definitions by using counterexamples and thought experiments. In order to detect logical inconsistencies among various claims, we often have to define terms clearly. Consider the following two claims. 1. It is always morally wrong to kill innocent persons. 2. Having an abortion is morally acceptable. Are these claims logically consistent with each other? In order to answer this question, we have to clarify the meaning of the term person. We need a definition. Only if we understand clearly what we mean by person can we decide whether a fetus is a person or not. Defining terms is a natural and important part of doing philosophy. However, as you can see in this example, arriving at satisfactory definitions is often hard and difficult work. In order to help you become better at developing definitions, I want to introduce you to one well-known method of defining terms in philosophy, defining terms with the help of necessary and sufficient conditions. Let us start with some terminology. The term which is clarified through a definition is called the definiendum. The sentence or phrase that is providing the clarification is called the definiens. So, when we want to clarify the meaning of the term person, the person is the definiendum and what we say to clarify it is the definiens. One of the most popular methods of clarifying terms entails identifying necessary and sufficient conditions for the correct application of the term. In order to illustrate this philosophical technique, let us consider a straightforward example. Suppose you meet someone who is confused about the term human. In order to help him, you can say, a human is a kind of animal. What you have just done is to state a necessary condition for being a human. Being an animal is a necessary condition for being a human because it is impossible for something to be a human if it is not an animal. We can illustrate this conceptual relationship visually with the help of the adjacent diagram. In general, one can define necessary conditions as follows. A condition Q is necessary for P if it is impossible for something to be P without being Q. Specifying the necessary conditions for the correct application of a term is a useful first step in clarifying a term. To know the necessary conditions for the application of a term is often equivalent to knowing what kind of thing one is dealing with. But more needs to be done before we arrive at a precise definition. What is important to see is that there are also other kinds of necessary conditions for being human. For example, being a primate is also a necessary condition for being a human. We can include the concept of a primate in our diagram. What is interesting to see is that the term primate is closer in meaning to the term human. So, defining a human as a kind of primate is better than defining it as a kind of animal, provided that we understand the terms primate and anima equally well. A definition works best if we can combine a number of necessary conditions such that the resulting definition captures the meaning of the term completely. For example, if we define a human as a primate that has a large brain and the capacity for speech, we have a pretty good definition for being a human. Let us look at another example. Suppose you encounter somebody who is confused about squares. In order to help her, you want to develop a precise definition. You notice right away that there are some necessary conditions for being a square. 1. For anything to be a square, it is necessary that the thing has exactly 4 sides. 2. For anything to be a square, it is necessary that the thing be a closed figure that lies in a plane. 3. For anything to be a square, it is necessary that all of the thing's sides be of equal length. Notice, too, that if we put all the necessary conditions together, we actually obtain a sufficient condition for the term to apply. We thus can obtain a good definition of the term square. A square is any closed figure that lies in a plane and has exactly 4 sides of equal length. In this case, one says that the necessary conditions are together jointly sufficient. In real philosophical investigations, philosophers are often at odds about whether a certain list of necessary conditions is jointly sufficient for a term to apply. Take, for example, the case of the American philosopher Mary Ann Warren, 1946 to 2010, who in her article on the moral and legal status of abortion 4 attempts to develop a precise definition of what we mean by the term person. She suggests, among other things, that the following 2 conditions are necessary and jointly sufficient for personhood. 1. Consciousness of objects and events external and for internal to the being, and in particular the capacity to feel pain. 2. Reasoning, the developed capacity to solve new and relatively complex problems. She concludes that we should understand a person as a being who has consciousness and an ability to reason. Such a clarification of personhood has significant ramifications. If we accept Warren's definition, it follows that fetuses are not persons and consequently have no moral and legal rights. If we want to reject Warren's analysis, we need to show that she has made a mistake in claiming that these two conditions are necessary and jointly sufficient for personhood. We will learn in the next section how definitions can be challenged. Food for thought. Practice your ability to distinguish necessary and sufficient conditions by answering the following questions with true or false. 1. Being an animal is a necessary condition for being human. 2. Being human is a necessary condition for being an animal. 3. Being unmarried is a necessary condition for being a bachelor. 4. Being a father is a sufficient condition for being a grandfather. 5. Being rich is a necessary condition for being happy. 6. Having a sister is a sufficient condition for having a sibling. 7. Being HO is necessary and sufficient for being water. 8. Being against the law is sufficient for being morally wrong. Logical possibility. 2.3 Differentiate between logical and causal possibility. Suppose you want to show that Warren's definition of personhood is mistaken. How can you do that? In order to challenge her, you have to demonstrate that there are possible counterexamples to her definition. Warren wants to define a person as being with consciousness and the ability to reason. Is it not possible that there are persons who lack these characteristics? Imagine a case of severe Alzheimer's. Is it not possible that a person who has severe Alzheimer's loses his ability to reason but retains his status as a person? I do not want to answer this question here, but I do want to draw attention to the role the word possible plays in our analysis. When doing philosophy, we need to find counterexamples, and in order to find counterexamples we need to know what is possible. However, the concept of possibility is also rich in ambiguity. It is, therefore, useful to distinguish various meanings of the word. Consider the following two sentences. A. It is not possible for LeBron James to throw a basketball so hard that it will travel for more than a mile through the air. B. It is not possible that LeBron James is both taller and shorter than Stephen Curry. Both of these sentences are truths, but the meaning of the word possibly differs between them. In the first sentence, we are dealing with causal possibility. The reason LeBron James cannot throw a basketball that far has to do with physics and the laws of nature. In general, we can say that a state of affairs is causally possible if it does not violate the laws of nature. For example, it is causally possible that 5 different hurricanes will hit Florida this year, or that the Philadelphia Phillies will win the World Series 3 times in a row. However, it is causally impossible for an aeroplane to travel faster than the speed of light, or for a human being to live without oxygen. Consider sentence A again. It is causally impossible for LeBron James to throw a basketball for more than a mile. Notice, however, that we can imagine LeBron throwing a basketball that far. Something like this will never happen on Earth, since the laws of nature do not permit such a thing. But one can conceive of it happening. It is therefore logically possible that LeBron can throw a basketball more than a mile through the air. A good test of whether something is logically possible is to ask yourself whether you could make a movie about it. We can depict scenes in movies that violate the laws of nature. We can make movies about superheroes, talking toasters, or flying horses, all of which are logically possible. When students are first introduced to the concept of logical possibility, they tend to think that everything is logically possible. But this is not the case. Notice that we cannot produce a movie that makes sentence be true. It is logically impossible that LeBron James is both taller and shorter than Stephen Curry. If we assert both claims, we are involved in a contradiction. We can say, therefore, that a state of affairs is logically possible if it does not entail a contradiction. But let us briefly return to the question that started our analysis of possibility. The crucial thing to remember is that in philosophy, when we test for consistency or search for contradictions, we check for logical and not causal possibility. In order to determine whether something is logically possible, we need to use our imaginations and explore what philosophers call possible worlds. This can be a bit confusing at first, but after a while it should be a lot of fun to explore in your mind whether certain scenarios are indeed logically possible. When philosophers consider logically possible scenarios, they conduct thought experiments, which often have the sound and feel of science fiction because they deal with remote, though still logically possible, scenarios. It is perfectly all right if you are still a bit skeptical of whether the notion of logical possibility can be of much use. The benefits of the ability to conceive of logically possible scenarios will become more obvious in the following sections and in the context of studying concrete philosophical problems. Food for thought. It is important that you clearly understand the distinction between logical and causal possibility. Answer the following questions with true or false. 1. It is causally possible for water to turn into gold. 2. It is causally possible that an earthquake will destroy all buildings in New York City. 3. It is logically possible that a soccer ball can be completely red and completely green at the same time. 4. It is logically impossible that all faculty members at Yale are space aliens. 5. It is logically possible that a girl is taller than herself. 6. It is logically possible for Britney Spears to turn into a frog. 7. It is causally possible for the sun to rotate around the earth. 8. It is logically possible that a triangle has only two sides. 9. It is causally possible that Superman is faster than a speeding bullet. 10. It is logically possible that there are more even natural numbers than odd natural numbers. The basic structure of arguments. 2.4 Reconstruct arguments in standard form. Most beginning students associate the word argument with a verbal disagreement. In ordinary language use, we frequently say things like the following: I had a bad argument with my roommate yesterday. However, this use of the word argument has nothing to do with its use in philosophy. In philosophy, we understand arguments to be reasons for thinking that an assertion is true. If I ask you to give me an argument in support of your belief that being famous is more important for happiness than being loved, I want you to give me your reasons for thinking that your claim about happiness is true. In order to illustrate this further, consider the following example. I believe that ghosts exist because late at night I have heard strange noises in my room. This is an example of an argument. It is, as we can easily see, not a particularly strong argument, but let us ignore that fact for the moment. Every argument has two components: a claim that the argument tries to establish and reasons that are offered in support of that claim. The claim is called the conclusion of the argument, and the reasons offered in support are called premises. In our example, the claim that ghosts exist is the conclusion of the argument, and the fact that strange noises have been heard is the premise of the argument. The presence of the word because, since, or for is a good indicator that the sentence or some part of it is used as a premise in an argument. When you see the words therefore, thus, hence, or it follows that, you are normally dealing with the conclusion of an argument. When you develop an argument yourself, it is always easy to know what the conclusion of your argument is going to be, because the conclusion is something you believe to be true and want others to believe as well. The claims God exists, all people are created equal, and I know that I am not dreaming right now can all function as the conclusion of an argument. It is, however, much more challenging to find good premises for these conclusions. The premises of an argument are the reasons you think your belief about the world is true. Good and reasonable premises for important claims are hard to come by since we know what we believe, but we often are not quite sure why we do so. Food for thought. Construct arguments that provide support for the following conclusions. 1. Humans are the cause of global warming. 2. Fake news stories influenced the presidential election of 2017. 3. Getting a degree in accounting is more useful than getting a degree in philosophy. 4. It is wrong to eat meat. 5. We have a moral obligation to pay our taxes. 6. Many commercially successful movies are not worth seeing. 7. Divorce has a negative impact on the affected children. 8. The US society in 2017 was more unequal than the US society was in 1965. 9. Death is the end of our existence. There is no afterlife. 10. Angels exist. Putting arguments into standard form. The last exercise illustrates that arguments come in many forms and shapes, but not all arguments are worth our time. Many are fairly silly pieces of reasoning. In order to accurately assess the value of arguments, it is frequently useful to put them into so-called standard form. An argument in standard form lists all the premises in numbered, sequential order, and then adds the conclusion at the end. Let us go back to our initial example. I believe that ghosts exist because late at night I have heard strange noises in my room. If we put this argument into standard form, we obtain the following. 1. I have heard strange noises late at night in my room. Therefore, ghosts exist. The word therefore is sometimes also symbolized as. Although arguments in ordinary discourse are rarely presented in standard form, it is useful to put them into this form since it becomes easier to determine whether the argument is reasonable or not. In philosophy, it is an important skill to put arguments, which are sometimes presented in convoluted ways, into standard form. The following exercise should help you acquire this skill. As you can see from these exercises, it can be challenging to put an argument into standard form. Sometimes arguments in ordinary language contain surplus information that needs to be eliminated. Not every claim in an argument will function as a premise after we have put the argument into standard form. On the other hand, arguments in ordinary discourse sometimes imply premises that are not stated explicitly. In that case, we need to supply additional premises that are not part of the original argument. To put an argument into standard form is, thus, not always a straightforward affair and often involves some degree of interpretation. When arguments get very complex, philosophers sometimes disagree about how best to present the argument in standard form. But in spite of these difficulties, it is always a good idea to try to put an argument into standard form. An argument in this form is much easier to evaluate since all can see its logical structure in one glance. Food for thought. Put the following arguments into standard form. In order to do so, it will be useful to identify the conclusion of the argument first. Keep in mind that the conclusion does not have to be stated last. 1. God exists. I know this since the Bible tells us that God exists, and the Bible contains only the truth. 2. Persons who smoke are irrational. This is clear since all rational people know that smoking is suicide and no rational person commits suicide. 3. It is wrong to take the life of a human being. A fetus is a human being, and to conduct an abortion is to take the life of a fetus. I conclude therefore that it is wrong to conduct an abortion. 4. It is just to punish each and every crime with the appropriate punishment. The death penalty is the appropriate punishment for serious crimes. It follows, therefore, that it is just to use the death penalty as a punishment for serious crimes. 5. Only those beings are free who can act in unpredictable ways. It is thus obvious that computers can never be free, for computers are programmed to act in predictable ways. 6. The world as a whole is just like a clock. Every clock has a creator. Therefore, it follows that the world as a whole has also a creator. 7. It is morally wrong for humans to eat meat. We know that humans can live well on a purely plant-based diet, and eating a plant-based diet reduces our carbon footprint and reduces the need to build and maintain factory farming of animals. 8. Everyone who imposes his or her way of life on other human beings commits a moral wrong. It follows therefore that banning smoking in all restaurants is morally wrong, for banning smoking in all restaurants is a case in which non-smokers impose their way of life on other human beings. 9. The primary function of a gun is to kill or injure people or animals. Unless you live in, or frequent, dangerous neighborhoods or have family or friends likely to threaten you, it is unlikely that you will need a gun for self-defense. It follows that only very few people can justify owning a gun because they need to defend themselves. 10. It is not wrong to kill spiders. But if spiders have eternal souls, then it is wrong to kill them. Thus, it is false that spiders have eternal souls. 11. The more recent US presidents have lived longest. The last 3 to die were all nonagenarians, Bush at 94, Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan at 93. These men, along with Jimmy Carter, who is alive and well at 94 and will reach Bush's age in March 21, are the 4 longest living presidents in history. It seems then that being President of the United States, in spite of all the stress and pressure, is actually good for your health and longevity. Food for thought. Put the following arguments into standard form, and at the premise that is implied but not stated explicitly. 1. All free beings abuse their free will from time to time. Peter is therefore a sinner since all people who abuse their free will from time to time are sinners. 2. Our proposals were not accepted, since all proposals in the green folder were rejected. 3. It is always irrational to believe a proposition on the basis of insufficient evidence. It follows therefore that belief in the existence of extraterrestrial beings is irrational. 4. Spending money on boring lectures is a waste of resources. It follows therefore that spending money on college is a waste of resources. 5. You will not do well in the upper level English class because the professor made it very clear that only students with strong writing skills have a chance to do well in that class. 6. Anybody who voluntarily decides to destroy his or her own body is irrational. This shows that smokers are irrational people. Deductive and inductive arguments. 2.5 Evaluate inductive and deductive arguments. To evaluate an argument, we first need to classify it. Different types of arguments are evaluated according to different criteria. Arguments fall into 2 main classifications. Consider the following 2 examples. Argument A. 1. The skyscraper Burj Khalifa in Dubai is the tallest building in the world. Therefore, the skyscraper Burj Khalifa is taller than the Sears Tower in Chicago. Argument B. 1. The prosecutor presented excellent evidence that Marlowe killed his mother. Therefore, Marlowe killed his mother. It is easy to see that these 2 arguments belong in different categories. In the case of argument A, the premise provides the strongest possible support for the conclusion. We call arguments of this type deductive arguments. In a deductive argument, the premises aim to provide conclusive support for the truth of the conclusion. The goal of a deductive argument is to offer such strong support that, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. Deductive arguments are common in mathematics and philosophy. On the other hand, are arguments like argument B. Argument B provides support for its conclusions, but the support is not conclusive. There is the possibility that the premise is true and the conclusion is nevertheless false. We call arguments of this type inductive arguments. The goal of an inductive argument is to provide support for the conclusion such that, if the premises are true, then it is very likely that the conclusion is true as well. Inductive arguments are more common than deductive arguments, and they are a natural part of social science and law codes. We will see very soon that deductive and inductive arguments are evaluated in different ways. It is therefore useful to develop the ability to distinguish between these two types of arguments. The following exercise will help you to develop this ability. Food for thought. Put the following arguments into standard form and determine whether they are inductive or deductive arguments. 1. All physical entities can be divided. A proton is a physical entity. Therefore, protons can be divided. 2. While I am taking this test, I am experiencing the same feeling of doom I experienced during my last math test. I failed that last math test, so it follows that I will fail this test as well. 3. If the universe does have a beginning, then the universe is not eternal. The universe clearly has a beginning. It follows therefore that the universe is not eternal. 4. I know that Kim has a pet, and Kim does not look like a cat person to me. Therefore, Kim probably has a dog. 5. We have found a piece of hair on the victim that matches the sample of hair we took from Bob. Bob therefore is the killer. 6. All forms of government are unjust. Therefore, democracy is unjust. 7. According to the odometer, the car I am driving right now is moving at the speed of 115 miles per hour. Therefore, the car I am driving right now is moving at the speed of 115 miles per hour. 8. All college students own and use a cell phone. All people who own and use a cell phone have a higher risk than non-cell phone users of developing brain cancer later in life. Therefore, college students have a higher risk than non-cell phone users to develop brain cancer later in life. 9. According to the weather report, there is a 100% chance of rain tonight. Therefore, it will rain tonight. Evaluating deductive arguments, validity and soundness. Deductive and inductive arguments are evaluated according to different standards. Let us start by taking a closer look at deductive arguments. A good deductive argument must be valid, that is, the following statement must apply. If all the premises of the argument are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. Please notice the if clause in this definition. Remember that an argument can be valid even if the premises are, in fact, false. Consider the following deductive argument. 1. All students have rich parents. 2. Peter is a student. Therefore, Peter has rich parents. This argument is valid, although premise 1 is obviously false. Notice that the argument has the necessary characteristic of validity. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. It does not matter that premise 1 is actually false. Validity is a judgment about the logical relationship between the premises and the conclusion. If the relationship is truth-preserving, that is, if the assumption that the premises are true guarantees that the conclusion is true as well, the argument is valid. In order to develop your ability to recognize valid arguments, complete the following exercise. Beginning students tend to be confused by the concept of validity. What is the point in determining whether an argument is valid if that does not guarantee that the argument has true premises? The reason is that it is frequently not possible to establish beyond all reasonable doubt whether a premise is true or false. But since we can establish whether an argument is valid without having to know whether the premises of the argument are true or false, we can criticize an argument as invalid simply by virtue of its logical structure. Demonstrating that a deductive argument is invalid is a powerful philosophical strategy to dismiss it. If I can show that an argument is invalid, I can say, well, I am not sure whether your premises are true or not, but even if they were true, it would not follow that the conclusion of your argument has to be true as well. Notice that in order to show that an argument is invalid, you have to use the concept of logical possibility. You must show that it is logically possible that the premises are true and yet the conclusion is false. Moreover, valid arguments help us to clarify the logical relation between ideas. If we find a valid argument but dislike the conclusion, perhaps because it conflicts with what we want to believe about the world, we know that we have to discard at least one of the premises. In order to understand this better, consider the following example. 1. If all events are caused, then we are not free. 2. All events are caused. Therefore, we are not free. This argument is valid, but most of us will find the conclusion hard to accept. We tend to think that we are free beings who are responsible for our actions. However, since the argument is valid, it shows us that if we want to reject the conclusion, we also have to reject at least one of its premises. For if both premises are accepted as true, the conclusion must be accepted as well. In this way, valid arguments help us to clarify the logical relation between our ideas. If we want to reject one idea, we often have to reject other, much more innocent-looking, ideas as well. Validity is, however, only a necessary condition for a deductive argument to be a good argument. When we explore the world with the help of arguments, not only do we want our deductive arguments to be valid, but in addition, we want our arguments to have true premises. Valid deductive arguments with true premises are called sound arguments. The ultimate goal in philosophy is always to produce and find sound arguments. Food for thought. Try to determine whether the following arguments are valid. A. 1. Taking a human life is always morally wrong. 2. Aborting a fetus is taking a human life. Therefore, aborting a fetus is morally wrong. B. 1. No government has the right to force people to pay taxes. Therefore, the United States government has no right to force people to pay taxes. C. 1. Many teenagers who watch violent movies act violently. Therefore, watching violent movies causes violent behavior. D. 1. All successful people are happy. 2. Jill is happy. Later on. Therefore, Jill is successful. Evaluating deductive arguments, logical form. Deductive arguments can be identified and classified according to their logical form. Take a look at the argument that follows and compare it with the argument about free will in the previous section. 1. If Tony takes drugs, then he is an irresponsible person. 2. Tony takes drugs. Therefore, Tony is an irresponsible person. It is easy to see that these two deductive arguments have the same form, that is, they follow the same pattern of thinking. This pattern can be expressed with the help of symbols to give a general argument schema. 1. If P, then Q. 2. P. Therefore, Q. This deductive argument form is well known among philosophers and has its own name, modus ponens. Every argument that is an instance of modus ponens must be valid. It does not matter what sentences are substituted for the placeholders P and Q. As long as the form modus ponens is preserved, the resulting argument must be valid. Being able to recognize the logical form of an argument is therefore an excellent and quick way to determine whether arguments are valid. Closely related to modus ponens is a deductive argument form called modus tollens. The following argument is an instance of modus tollens. 1. If moral objectivism is true, then all cultures would embrace the same moral values. 2. All cultures do not embrace the same moral values. Therefore, moral objectivism is false. The logical form of modus tollens can be captured with the help of the following argument schema. 1. If P, then Q. 2. Not Q. Therefore, not P. Another well-known deductive argument form is called disjunctive syllogism. The following is an example of a disjunctive syllogism. 1. Either death is a dreamless sleep or death is a journey to another realm. 2. Death is not a journey to another realm. Therefore, death is a dreamless sleep. The following argument schema expresses the general logical form of a disjunctive syllogism. 1. Either P or Q. 2. Not Q. Therefore, P. A further famous argument form is called a hypothetical syllogism. The following argument is an instance of this logical form. 1. If materialism is false, then Marxism is a faulty philosophical system. 2. If Marxism is a faulty philosophical system, then one should not believe everything Marx writes. Therefore, if materialism is false, then one should not believe everything Marx writes. The following argument schema expresses the logical form of hypothetical syllogisms. 1. If P, then Q. 2. If Q, then R. Therefore, if P, then R. There are many additional deductive argument forms, but to introduce all of them would go beyond the scope of an introductory textbook. Being familiar with modus ponens, modus tollens, disjunctive syllogism, and hypothetical syllogism should make you aware that many deductive arguments can quickly be identified and recognized as instances of well-known valid logical argument forms. Food for thought. Put the following deductive arguments into standard form and determine whether the arguments are the form modus ponens, modus tollens, disjunctive syllogism, or hypothetical syllogism. 1. Either I will stop smoking right now, or I will suffer severe health problems in the next 10 years. I know myself well enough to know that I will not stop smoking at any time soon. It follows therefore that I will suffer severe health problems in the next 10 years. 2. If it is true that all people act always with only their own interests in mind, then no one can truly be moral. But if no one can truly be moral, then studying moral theory is pointless. It follows therefore that if all people act always with only their own interest in mind, then studying moral theory is pointless. 3. In order to pass the class, I must score more than 90% on the final exam. I, therefore, did not pass the class, since I scored 85% on the final exam. 4. Either God is mad, or the creation of the universe was simply a cosmic accident. God is certainly not mad. We must conclude, therefore, that the creation of the world was simply a cosmic accident. 5. If it is logically possible that all my current beliefs are false, then I cannot refute global skepticism. Although I hate to admit it, it surely is logically possible that all my beliefs are false. I conclude therefore that I cannot refute global skepticism. 6. If life on Earth is simply the result of natural processes, then we should not be surprised to find other forms of life on other planets. Life is the result of natural processes. It follows thus that we should expect to find other forms of life on other planets. 7. If my senses are reliable, then whatever I see or hear is in fact true. My senses are therefore not reliable, because sometimes I see or hear things that are not true. 8. Either studying philosophy is corrupting the soul of young people, or it is a path to true wisdom. Young people are corrupted by their desire for sex, money, or fame, but certainly not by studying philosophy. So, studying philosophy must indeed be the path to true wisdom. Evaluating in arguments, probability. As we have seen already, the premises of an inductive argument support its conclusion only to some degree of probability. Take a look at the following example of an inductive argument. 1. All people I have ever met have lied whenever it was convenient for them. Therefore, all humans lie whenever it is convenient for them. Let us suppose the premise of this argument is true. This certainly gives us a reason for thinking that the conclusion is true as well. If all people I know start to lie whenever it is convenient for them, I certainly have reason to believe that all humans do the same. Notice, however, that the conclusion does not have to be true. Given the truth of the premise, it is still logically possible that there are some humans who never lie. For this reason, inductive arguments, unlike deductive arguments, can never be valid. However, it would be silly to reject an inductive argument on this basis. In order to evaluate inductive arguments, we do not check to see whether they are valid or invalid. Instead, we try to determine whether they establish their conclusion with a high or low degree of probability. Inductive arguments that establish their conclusion to a high degree of probability are called strong inductive arguments. Consider the following example. 1. 90% of students in my Philosophy 101 course are freshmen. 2. Lori is in my Philosophy 101 course. Therefore, Lori is probably a freshman. It is easy to see that this argument establishes the conclusion to a high degree of probability. The inductive argument is therefore strong. Contrast this with the following argument. 1. Some people who live in San Francisco are poor. 2. Sadesha lives in San Francisco. Therefore, Sadesha is poor. It is relatively easy to see that this argument establishes the conclusion only to a low degree of probability. These types of arguments are called weak inductive arguments. If an inductive argument is strong and if its premises are true, then we classify the argument as cogent. It is relatively difficult to evaluate inductive arguments quickly. In philosophy, inductive arguments do not play as central a role as they do in other more empirical disciplines like psychology or sociology. However, 3 types of inductive arguments are worth mentioning. Probably the most widely used type of inductive argument is called an enumerative inductive argument. The previous argument is a good example. The basic idea behind this type of inductive argument can be expressed with the help of the following argument schema. 1. All observed A's have been us. Therefore, probably all as everywhere are B's. Although enumerative inductive arguments are frequently used, it is difficult to evaluate them. An enumerative inductive argument is certainly stronger if we have observed a relationship between events of type A and events of type B to occur frequently, if the sample size is large. But even then, the resulting enumerative inductive argument can still be weak. To illustrate this, consider the following example. 1. All cars that I have observed have been red. Therefore, probably all cars everywhere are red. Notice that this argument remains weak even if I have seen thousands of red cars. The problem is that the relationship between being red and being a car is an accidental one. There is no underlying connection between being a car and being red. Enumerative inductive arguments are most successful when they are dealing with so-called law-like relationships. For example, if I have observed that several metal bars have expanded when they were exposed to heat, then I am justified to conclude that probably all metal bars expand when heated. In this case, there exists a law-like relationship that explains why metal bars expand when heated. It is, however, far from clear how to know when we are dealing with law-like relationships. Fortunately, philosophers do not use enumerative inductive arguments as frequently as scientists do, and it is therefore sufficient to recognize the logical form of these arguments without yet knowing how to evaluate them properly. We will discuss the strength of these arguments in more detail when we discuss the classical epistemological problem of induction. A second important type of inductive argument is called argument by analogy. Consider the following example. Therefore, I conclude that I will also get a low grade in this philosophy class. The strength of this argument depends on the comparison between English classes and philosophy classes. Analogical arguments can be very powerful and are frequently used in philosophical writings. However, it is easy to see that the strength of an argument by analogy depends on the degree to which the two compared items are indeed similar to each other. In some respects, English classes are just like philosophy classes. Both classes normally involve reading and the writing of papers. But there are also some crucial differences. Philosophical writing tends to be shorter and more argument-driven than writing in English classes, and the reading materials in both classes are of course quite different. These differences between English classes and philosophy classes undermine the strength of the argument by analogy, which has to be classified as a weak inductive argument. Because there are no general rules to determine whether an analogy is appropriate, analogical arguments must be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. If the analogy is a strong one, the resulting inductive argument is strong. If the analogy is weak, the resulting argument is weak. A final important type of inductive argument is called inference to the best explanation, or abductive argument. The key idea of this type of inductive argument can be explained with the help of the following by now familiar example. 1. I have heard strange noises late at night in my room. Therefore, ghosts exist. As it stands right now, this inductive argument does not seem very strong. However, consider the following modification of the argument, which turns the argument into an inference to the best explanation. 1. I have heard strange noises late at night in my room. 2. The best explanation for these strange noises is that they are caused by ghosts. Therefore, ghosts probably exist. If premise 2 is indeed true, and the hypothesis that ghosts cause these strange noises is the best explanation available, then the argument is much stronger than it was before. This, however, raises a crucial question: how can we determine whether a given explanation of an event is better than all other explanations? Any event can be explained in many different ways. Strange noises in the night might, for example, be caused by ghosts, or by mice in the attic, or by a roommate who is watching a horror movie. Our judgment of whether a given explanation is better than others depends on many factors, but two frequently play a prominent role and are therefore worth mentioning. 1. Explanation A is better than explanation B if, all other things being equal, explanation A is simpler than explanation B. 2. Explanation A is better than explanation B if, all other things being equal, explanation A fits together better with the rest of my beliefs about the world. Principle 1 is often called Ockham's razor in recognition of the medieval philosopher William of Ockham, 1285 to 1347, who praised simplicity as a virtue in theory construction. Principle 2 can be called the principle of conservatism. Both principles are somewhat controversial. The principle of Occam's razor requires a clear understanding of the term simplicity. We normally think that an explanation is simpler if it requires us to make fewer independent assumptions. But it is not always clear how many independent assumptions are involved in a given explanation. As for the principle of conservatism, it is rather subjective, that is, an explanation that is compatible with the rest of my belief system might not fit well into your belief system. If I am a professional ghost hunter who has seen many ghosts in the past and who is spending a night in a haunted castle, the idea that strange noises are caused by ghosts might be the most conservative explanation available to me. On the other hand, if I am a person who has never seen ghosts and who is sleeping in a dorm room on campus, I will consider the idea that strange noises at night are caused by ghosts to be too outlandish, non-conservative, to be true. In this case, it is easier to accept the idea that the noises are caused by a student in the next room who is watching a horror movie. This explanation is, in this situation, not only more conservative but also simpler and thus probably the best explanation available. As you can see from this example, inferences to the best explanation must be evaluated very carefully. Deciding which explanation is indeed the best is often contentious, and reasonable people might come to different conclusions. However, this type of inductive argument plays an important role in philosophy, and we will encounter it frequently during our exploration of well-known philosophical problems. Food for thought. Take a look at the following arguments and decide whether they are inductive or deductive arguments. If they are inductive, indicate what type of inductive argument they are, and decide whether they are weak or strong. 1. We humans love to think that we are special beings in this universe. However, if you really think about it, we humans are just like machines. Of course, we are rather complicated machines, but that doesn't change the fact that we are machines. It is clear, of course, that machines can never have free will. It follows therefore that we humans have no free will as well. 2. If God exists, then innocent beings would not be suffering in the world. However, innocent beings do suffer. It follows therefore that God doesn't exist. 3. I talked to Maja yesterday and found out that she doesn't believe in God. She also told me that she is very frustrated and unhappy. Billy and his brother Jim are frustrated and unhappy as well, and they, too, are atheists. I conclude therefore that atheists everywhere are frustrated and unhappy with their lives. 4. I went to Professor Hogan's office hours yesterday, but there was a long line of students waiting for him. I eventually gave up waiting. I think the best explanation of why so many students were waiting outside Professor Hogan's office is that he must have given them bad grades. I conclude therefore that Professor Hogan is a hard grader. 5. If being an altruist is a necessary condition for being moral, I have to conclude that I am not moral, for it is clear to me that I am not an altruist. 6. The universe is really just like a complicated clock. But every clock has a maker. It follows therefore that the universe has to have a maker as well. 7. My first marriage ended when I told my wife about an affair. My second marriage ended when my wife found out that I had had a fling. I conclude therefore that my third marriage will end as well if my third wife ever finds out that I am cheating again. 8. How did the universe get started? Scientists tell us that it all started with the Big Bang. But what caused the Big Bang? I think the best explanation is that God caused the Big Bang. I conclude therefore that God probably exists. Study and reflection questions. 1. Many successful commercials are based on invalid or fallacious arguments. Describe a commercial that is based on a fallacious argument. Will the commercial be successful in spite of its logical deficiencies? 2. Some philosophers such as Kierkegaard have argued that those who put too much emphasis on reason might end up with a problematic worldview. What do you think? Is it possible to be influenced too much by reason? 3. Try to develop a good definition of the term happiness. Do this by identifying necessary and sufficient conditions for being happy. Do you think that your definition captures the essence of happiness? 4. Describe a person who has logically inconsistent beliefs. Will such an inconsistent belief system necessarily lead to disadvantages and problems? 5. Enumerative inductive arguments play a crucial role in science. However, we have seen that such arguments support their conclusions only with a high degree of probability. There is always the possibility that the conclusions of enumerative inductive arguments are false even if the premises are all true. Is that a problem for scientists?